So, what I decided to do was draw out the wing and make my own little couple new ribs. All I did was make them, oh, and a wingtip, a balsa wingtip. Um, all I did was kind of do them by eye based on the size of the spar and cut notches in them and cut notches in the spar, new places. So those give me two extra ribs and they are okay. And I also made a 3/32 inch. Oh, look at that! Huh. Now you know what I'm doing when I'm building these. This is why I don't run marathons. I made a leading edge out of 3/32 balsa, basically kind of like I build flying models, and I thought that would give me a nice um, place to attach the front, and maybe I wouldn't get so many crinkles when it goes around the front leading edge. So it's kind of an experiment. But I thought this is a good model to attempt that. But I traced out, I did the one side and I traced this against the window, and there I've got the left side ready to go. And, it's pretty simple. Doesn't have to be beautiful. But anyway, these notches, and then you can see there I notched out the leading edge so that I can attach that um, leading edge balsa. That balsa is just kind of hard balsa, and then there are notches I put in the spars, and then you just add them like you did the rest of the ribs that came with the actual kit. And again, just doing it by eye seemed to be just fine. They're not perfect by any means, but they do give me extra structure because that long spar sticking out there to me is just asking for trouble. Um, and you can see hints on the other side. What I ended up doing was filling balsa in between each station, trying to just make it stronger. Because my problem with building wings in general is I tend to make them twist, and they tend to not look good. They have wash in or wash out the tips, and they flail around a lot. So I'm trying to make wings that look half decent. The only wing I really made that was beautiful was a Holinsky kit, P40, that turned out great. But Holinsky kits are made like tanks, and so it really worked out well. So anyway, this is my attempt to sort of pseudo do this on this old model. Um, I'm just doing this with super glue, adding my zip kicker as usual, and then adding this other little rib here. Um, and these ribs, by the way, are located close to where there's like typical panel lines on the wing, so I'm hoping they'll sort of be hidden a bit. They go along, at least based on where the art is, where there'd be um, structure on the wing. So making sure they're as square as I can, and then you can see everything is kind of bendy still. But if I fill in these rear and front stations with squared off balsa, 1/16 balsa, everything should, in theory, remain nice and straight. I don't know why I didn't just pin this down and just build it like a rare old balsa flying model, which would have made much more sense. That's because I didn't think to do this until I was already pretty far along. And I thought, well, build it like the Holinsky ones with just those pieces in between should work. So I used little pieces of paper and just used that, marked them off. I put my balsa with the grain going that way along the length of the wing so that when you compress the ribs together to make them square, they they wouldn't collapse. Just making sure that I've got a square edge piece on there, and then when I do, I mark off where the thickness where the ribs are going to be, where the opening is, and then I take my little square and I put a ruler up against and butt it up against the wood and the square, and then I know that that is pretty dang close to perpendicular there. And then run my knife back and forth quite a bit until you cut through. And now you then basically take that piece and fit it in. Now, ideally, the plan is you've got a perfectly square piece in there. Maybe hit with a little sandpaper. The idea is that's perfectly square, so if I glue that in the perfect world, that should automatically make everything square. The ribs should be parallel to one another, and they should be perpendicular to that spar. In practice, it didn't work perfectly, but it was certainly better than what I had originally. Trying to put paper around that little tiny bit of wing structure to me is just not going to work. At least it hasn't worked for me. There's others who can do it apparently, because I've seen this model finished even on the internet. So someone figured it out, but not me. Anyway, mark off where the rear cuts are going to be. These are going to have to be perfect because they're going to be cut and altered and sanded later. These are just to get those pieces to be, again, parallel to one another, make sure the ribs are parallel. We're only going for parallel and square, and how it looks doesn't matter because it's all going to be covered with the paper. That's why both sides are not actually symmetrical. You'll see that I got, when I was playing with the other side and practicing, some of the cuts aren't nearly as clean, or they kind of go all over the place, which doesn't matter. Again, all I'm trying to do is keep the ribs strong and straight, at least in theory. So put a little bit of glue, of the tacky glue, and then I slide that up and just put it into essentially the center of the spar. And once that's up against there and starts to dry, again, that should be, and then if you push the ribs up against it, technically they should be nice and square. And then I just line those up, the ends up, so that they make sense in terms of they're on the tips of the ribs, the trailing edge, so that they are holding their shape. I also once in a while take a look end on to make sure I'm not putting a twist into the wing, which is again what I'm trying to bloody avoid. So I got these together, and then I add a little bit of thick super glue, and a little bit, my gosh, that's a bucket. But anyway, I'll add some super glue, and then I smear that around to make sure that it gets in contact with both surfaces, and then I'll hit it with a little zip kicker to hurry up and get it nice and tight, because I'm holding it with my finger so that I know that it's pretty good, it's pretty even, and they're touching one another. And then once you add the zip kicker, then bang, it's solid. And it does make for a solid wing, I'll say that. We'll see what happens when I try to actually skin it, but ideally this was working out pretty well. And I just add my zip kicker, and she is solid as a rock right there. And all I'm doing then is basically filling in most, not all, but most of these rib stations in between, all the way down to the end, and then the wingtip. And there's where the wingtip's going to end up going, supposedly. And a little bit of, you can see it's crooked, but when I'm all done, it'll straighten out, especially with that leading edge. Now, this next set of pictures is towards the end, and sadly, the sunlight was coming in, so I apologize, there's some bad shadows here, but I got that all filled in, and now what I'm doing is adding my leading edge. So a little bit of super glue onto those notches when it finally comes out, and then when it does, it comes out in gobs. Anyway, fill those in, a little bit of super glue, and then add my leading edge. Now, I've test fit this 100 million times to make sure that it's straight and that my leading edge is straight. And again, I'm not imparting any kind of warp. It's okay that the first rib was overlapped, because I can sand that off later. But now I'm just eyeballing this and making sure that it's good. I put it down on my plan to make sure that the rake is correct and the leading edge is not way out of line. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you do want it to be, at least looking like it's kind of supposed to look. Making sure that that the paper is gonna be able to align with it and make a nice form. That's really all you're doing, is trying to have a place for the paper to glue. And again, in my case, I'm hoping that this makes a wing that doesn't twist and has a nice trailing edge, and the wingtips look good, and all the rest. Because man, I have a hard time making that work. It's my hardest, the most difficult thing I've done with paper models. And there I am adding the wingtip, and I've cut a little notch up on the leading edge, and I'm test fitting it. And again, I looked at this end on to make sure that it looks flat, and then again, not imparting any warps. Um, Next time I do this, I will take the time to actually make it flat on a surface. Um, the only problem with that, the difficulty is these ribs are um, rounded on both the top and the bottom, which makes it harder to do that. A lot of my flying models I build, they just got flat, regular airfoil on top, but the bottom of the rib is flat, so you can put it on a flat building board, and everything's nice and square and true and beautiful. This wouldn't be that way. You have to put tabs or something on it to make it level. But again, I'm trying to make this kind of like I've built, like I said, the Holinsky kit before. Just trying to see if I can do something that's simple and you can sort of do by eye and hold it and make it work. So there, I'm just trying to get those things connected. And here's where you can't see what's going on, but trust me, there's a little bit of glue on there. And now I'm going to hit it with some zip kicker and make sure that it's nice and strong. And everything is fit nicely. I'm not forcing things in. I mean, I learned a long time ago, you can't do that. You want to make it so that it just fits nicely. Otherwise, you are going to have problems. But there it is. And now what it needs to be is sanded a lot. And the trailing edge is going to be altered, by the way. It's going to have to be sanded and altered both. But here you start sanding that leading edge into a round airfoil shape so that it matches the front of the rib. And with this big sanding block, it makes quick work. And it should be relatively straight. I should be able to do that and make a nice rounded edge. And so this is just making sure it's all nice and solid and making sure, and I can thin it in places. I thin the trailing edges, and I was thinning the wingtip quite a lot. A lot of that is just sanding, boring sanding, but just making sure that I've got thin edges. Otherwise, things won't look good, and it'll be too thick. But then you can see I've drawn little lines and things where I've test fit this before to make sure it fits okay. So that's the location of the main spar, and where that root rib goes. And the bottom flap that my index finger was on there, that's a part that goes under the fuselage, and they should match up together. We'll see how that goes. But then I just roll this over and make sure it matches as close as I can. A little mismatch isn't the end of the world because I'm going to, again, paint this and prime it and all the rest. But you do want to make it as nice as possible because then there aren't any stress points on it, or very few stress points on it. And as I learned on the Vimy, I didn't have the wings skins that perfect, and then it did impart some twist and some billowiness. But I like the leading edge. You can't see it, but trust me, leading edge has no crinkles. And that's a first because my wings usually crinkle. So I guess that's having that support underneath. So that's good. I was pretty pleased. So now, this side is being sanded extensively. The wingtip's been reshaped. The leading edge is nice and smooth. We've done a lot of sanding, a lot of thinning. It's all very thin, very, very small. And I now tried something new too. I put a little bit of glue on the very tip, the very, very tip of the wing. And I've never done this before. Usually I just put it on without anything and then glue around. But I thought, I'm going to try this to see if this works. Notion being that you kind of slide the piece in, the skeleton in, as opposed to folding it over. So it kind of goes in a little pocket. And again, it looks relatively easy, but this is after 63 trillion test fits. And then I started gluing, and I glued all these little ribs and all these edges and the leading edge and the trailing edge, trying to get it all nice. Put some extra, or when there's extra, I doused it off with a little bit of finger dabbing. And then you commit to the plate piece. And it's frightening to do this, I have to say. Because everything fits until you add glue, and then things don't quite work. And that was the case with this. It works. It works, but it's not the way it was when I test fit it. So I push it up there, making sure that everything is deep enough. Those pieces are supposed to match up, but they don't quite, which I don't care about. I'll put something over them later, and there's a piece of paper that does go over them. But now what I'm doing is making sure that I'm getting contact with the glue with all those ribs and making sure that the skeleton is where it's supposed to be. And I basically go over this with my fingers and make sure that the main spar glue is hitting things, make sure that the ribs are all hitting top and bottom. I don't have any glue on the trailing edge yet. I figure I go back later, add some glue to that, and then pinch those together. At least that's what I did this time. Because I was, with this tacky glue, it dries fast, so I thought I wanted to get the things on there first, get the basic skins on. I can always squeeze the trailing edge together. At least that was my plan. But what I'm doing now is just kind of massaging the paper, making sure that it looks pretty good, making sure that I've got good alignment. And even though I'm going to repaint this whole thing, the wings anyway, the colors look kind of cool. It doesn't look so bad now that I've got it on there. The fuselage really needs work, but the wings aren't so bad. But since I'm going to change the fuselage, I'll change the wings. You can see I got a little mismatch right there by my thumb, and I just noticed that now when I turn this over. But that's okay. That's not the end of the world. Just making sure, because what I didn't want to do is be able to look on the look at it from the leading edge and see little bumps and burbles. I didn't want that. So here I'm taking an old X-Acto blade and sliding some glue all on the trailing edge and just basically doing that all the way down, and then I'll squeeze those together. And just making sure it goes all the way down, everything's nice, and I got glue everywhere it needs to be. And again, if I was not going to paint this, I'd have to probably be a little more careful, but this is going to be sanded, painted, and primed. I think we're going to be okay. And now I just make sure that I get these nice and solid, and so I start pinching them together, and then I end up putting it on its end here and literally squeezing them shut. And this panel actually worked out pretty well. I got no twist in it. I got a fine trailing edge. Looks pretty awesome. The other side's got a little twist on the wingtip, so I still need to do some work. Need to figure it out better. But there they are. Doesn't look too shabby. You can see that one side there's a mismatch. But then I just wanted to put this on to show you. That just slides into that slot again. But now with the covering on, it's kind of cool to see it together. I think what I'll end up doing next, but I'm not going to put the wing on. I think I'm going to put the nacelles on, because they might help me locate the wing and make things nice and parallel and perpendicular. But anyway, in general, there it is. And I believe there's a wing fillet that goes in there. And this, again, is just test fit and sitting there. And again, the trailing edge on this side with the wing has to be painted and stuff. That's actually a copied piece, by the way, because I tried to emboss on the original piece. It ended up messing things up. And there's the underside. So I had to actually make a copy of that. So that's why there's some pieces. My copier wasn't big enough, so I had to actually splice a little bit of white on that trailing edge there. But anyway, coming along. Can't wait to do some more.